Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Kevin Moore Show. Now, if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos, just click that subscribe button below, as it really helps to support the show. If you're new to the show, I interview guests from a spiritual perspective, covering mainstream and alternative subjects and much more. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my two guests, Darcy Weir and Gary King. Now, they'll discuss the new documentary, Crop Circle Reality. Now, Darcy Weir is an independent documentary filmmaker from Canada, trained as a video editor, writer, director, producer, and has released a number of documentaries. I'm also joined by Gary King, who has dedicated himself to the task of understanding everything regarding the crop circle phenomena. Now, Gary has lectured both nationally and internationally and has appeared in numerous TV, news, and documentary shows worldwide. Darcy Weir and Gary King, thank you for joining us.
Hi, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Really pleased that you've had me on the show. Thanks very much.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having us.
So it's great to have you both on. And Darcy, we're just going to start with yourself. So this is based on your new documentary, Crop Circle Realities. Where can people find that documentary?
Yeah, people can find that documentary on Apple, like iTunes, Google Play, YouTube Red, Vudu, and I'm pretty sure most cable platforms across the United States, like Verizon Fios, Cox Cable, Dish Network, that type of thing.
Okay, so obviously, did you go for a distribution, or is this sort of self-distributed, or how have you done that?
Pretty hard pressed to get onto cable and satellite with self-distribution. No, I'm going through Uncorked Entertainment. Yeah, they've taken a bunch of my recent films, and
congrats.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah, thank you.
That's great news. And how many documentaries do you have under your belt?
I have released about 9 films to date. The very first documentary I ever released was back in 2012. That was a documentary about military-industrial cover-up of the UFO issue, underground bases. It was called The Underground, and I featured the story of Phil Schneider, Richard Dolan, a whole bunch of interesting researchers that have looked into this subject throughout history. So I've been making documentaries since the very first time I made that documentary. It was for free on YouTube. But since then, it's been re-released, cut. That's for free on Amazon Prime. People can go check that out. Tubi TV, platforms like this. And pretty much about 80% of my catalog of films are on Amazon Prime, Tubi TV, free to watch.
So you've obviously got a bit of a filmmaker background. Did you go to film school, or?
Yeah, I studied film and sociology in university. I think it's sociology that pushed me towards doing documentary work, because as you study sociology courses, which is the study of behavioral patterns in groups of people, you get exposed to a lot of documentaries. Look at somebody like Noam Chomsky, for example. He's in how many documentaries? And the UFO subject, cryptid subject, I've always been interested in UFOs. This is something that I took great interest in since I was 19 years old. I'm 36 now. And I started my documentary research and producer work in the UFO subject. Eventually got tipped off to the whole Bigfoot, Sasquatch subject matter, and eventually made 2 documentaries in that sort of area of research. And I never thought I'd be interested in that cryptid, and I always thought that was just completely far-fetched and impossible to take seriously. But if you watch my documentaries, I feel like I've done a pretty good job of compiling many different facts and the history of that cryptid sort of existing and not being taken seriously by the mainstream scientific institutions and the mainstream media.
Okay, and if I was to ask you, what are you searching for? You've kind of answered that, but what do you think at a deeper level that you're searching for?
Truth, the fact that truth is a very complex issue. Reality is a very complex situation that we're all living. What's true to some people may be completely untrue to others. But with my documentary work, I actually try to find facts. There's many documentaries out there that are very sensational, and they have incredible speakers, people that are very convinced of the things that they're saying, and are very confident in the way that they present the information. And sometimes the information is not factual. It doesn't really have a traceable history. It doesn't really have many people to prove that things have happened or that their theories are true. And the documentaries that I produce, I try to back everything that's being presented with facts, with history, with all kinds of angles to prove that this thing may exist.
Yeah, I think that's important. Otherwise, practically, what's the point of it? You know what I mean? I suppose that's a bit of an angle as well. It's like practically, does any of this stuff? Why are we doing it? What's it shifting? What is our message we're trying to get out there, and what's it shifting? Do you know what I mean? What world do you think you're trying to create, in a sense, or are you? What are you trying to expose? Do you think? I mean, you talk about truth, but what would you like to see the world like by telling these types of stories with this particular documentary on crop circles as well?
Sure. Well, I'm trying to expose realities that are underrepresented in the mainstream. And people that have been talking about these realities in the many different stories that are represented through my documentaries, crop circle realities being one of them. I'm trying to expose that this is something that should be taken seriously and people should focus some attention on it. Crop circles have been around for a long, long time. And Gary King himself has walked into over 20 years worth of research. He's walked into over 900 different crop circle formations as they've appeared over the years. And I think he's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other researchers that he's worked with and people that have presented data on the crop circle issue. But unfortunately, in the sort of UFO, ufology realm of research, where people every year are saying, hey, there's something here, not many people in the sort of millennial age group where I come from even know about crop circles. And when I produced this documentary, I wanted to make it for people of my age group, but also relate it to a deep history that's connected with crop circles out in Wiltshire, UK. If I butchered the pronunciation
pretty
of that,
good.
please
pretty
don't
good.
flog me. But it's an underrepresented area of study in ufology, and I think it's because the debunkers and the mainstream media that has been covering this for a very long time has succeeded in letting people, even in the ufology realm, believe that there's nothing to see there. There's nothing worth pursuing. And with this recent documentary, I wanted to point out there's something to see here. There's something interesting. There's something real that we can't completely avoid. And Gary has done really good research in terms of providing data and facts surrounding crop circles and the anomalies that make it so that one can prove and one can think, well, not all of them are man-made. Some of them in history are man-made for sure, but there's even elements about man-made ones that are not heavily discussed. How they're made, how long it takes, the amount of money that's invested, how many people are involved to make them look perfect, to make them look similar to the ones that are presented in the National Geographic debunker documentary, or BBC's mainstream tell that Doug and Dave, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley are the ones that created all of them previous to 1990s.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I like the way that you've put the documentary together. It's just nice and easy to watch. Do you know what I mean? It's you've done it in a really good way, and sometimes the simpler it is, the better, I think. And yeah, I like the way that you've sewn the interviews together with the pictures and everything else. So yeah. So Gary, just want to bring you in here as well. Sort of great introduction there by Darcy. So well, your background. Okay, so you were a lawyer. I've got down that you were a private detective, and in your third reincarnation, you're now, have devoted your time to the crop circles. Is that correct? I mean, I've missed out probably a lot there, but
Yeah. No. I mean, that's the nuts and bolts of it. Yeah, I was a lawyer until 1996. Really, I ran a private investigation agency in London. Two agencies actually. I worked for somebody for a while, and then I created my own company, which is still going. The business was sold, and it's like a 5-story building in Bristol, in England now. So it was quite a success. My ex-business partner's still in business there. Yeah, in 1997, I encountered my first crop circle, and basically I spent the last 25 years trying to get to the nuts and bolts of what it all means.
wow, I think the private detective thing there, that must come in handy in this field when maybe you're looking at your next documentary, maybe because obviously there's a lot of people out there who make claims, but they, as Darcy said, unless they're backed up by facts, it's it's difficult to if you're going to make a documentary, to want to include that unless you're coming from a different angle on it. So okay, what do you think the most important message of the documentary is?
The documentary or the crop circles?
The documentary.
Both, I suppose.
Yeah.
The documentary, I think, as Darcy said, we're trying to get to people to understand some information that isn't really well circulated, or hasn't been very well circulated about the crop circles. Every season it's the same old story. A few crop circles are pictured in newspapers or on a news program, and they say, here's these wonderful formations and here's these guys who make them. Let's all get back to the football. And like a lot of subjects, really, you can look at them superficially, but when you actually look at the details, then it begins to spur you to say, well, hang on, there's a mystery here. There's unanswered questions. For example, if I switch to Egyptology, mainstream Egyptologists will tell us that the pyramids at Giza were built in 20 years. So there's a time frame there, and you don't need to be a scientist then to work out the details, which are that the rocks were brought from Luxor, which is 500 miles away, and there's 2 million rocks at the pyramids of Giza. And they tell us that in those days, these people only had 2 million rocks in 20 years is one every 2 minutes that's quarried, carved, transported, and put into place every 2 minutes. Well, I don't think you need to have a brain at all, really, to understand that. That's just not possible. And yet they still maintain that position. Well, it's the same with the crop circles. I look at basic things like time frame and conditions and damage and quality and so on and so And when you bring those things to the forefront, you then have to question if this is humanly possible by the examples that we've got from people that do go out and make the crop circles.
Okay, let's go a bit deeper here. And I know we're missing out loads by me saying this, but let's just go to this space. Okay, so there's information in these crop circles. We're pretty sure there is. What is the sort of spiritual message of all this, do you think? Do you think there is one?
Yes, absolutely. But I think that the definition of spirituality is something that probably needs to be more clearly defined with regards to what the message is. Excuse me. Most people think that, well, a lot of people think that spirituality these days is taking some yoga classes, buying some incense, and sitting in lotus position, omming every morning. And yes, that is a spiritual practice, but it's not really, doesn't really get to the heart of what spirituality is. Spirituality to me is, what is the human condition? What is the reason for us to be here on earth? Is it a created existence, something that's intelligently designed, which gives us a purpose and a meaning? Or is it a random accident that science would have us believe? And if it is, then the question comes, where do we go after we die? Is there a spirit to our body? Is there a metaphysical part to us and existence? And I think the crop circles speak very heavily about that in a number of ways. Number one, my belief is that the message of the crop circles is like a therapy lesson. They are reflecting us back to ourselves. So they're saying, here you are, you've been alive, your ancestors have been alive, and human beings have been alive on the planet for a given amount of time. And during that time, they've considered, is there a God? Is there a metaphysical reality? Religions have spurned, philosophies have spurned from that. And we've been reminded of those through geometry, which is an ancient geometric pursuit of cosmology and meaning practiced by the ancient Greeks. We have a category of crop circles which depicts religious and philosophical symbols like the yin yang and the cross of Christ and the tree of life and so on. So these are ways that we have tried to wrestle with reality, find out if there's something more to it, where we go after death and so on. We've had animals and insects, which is obviously an intrinsic part of nature that we are connected to. Without them, we don't exist. We've had astronomical symbols, which reflect us back to the time when our ancestors were observing the heavens, the motions of the heavens, and detailing them very specifically in monuments such as Stonehenge and Avebury. Crop circles appear. And using geometry, hidden geometry, implicit geometry, that underpins reality. So it's that which we don't see. If you look at 5-petaled flowers and so on, there is a geometry which exists, which is perfect, that exists behind that. So it hints to us that there is an order in time and space, which is number. Geometry is number in space. That tells us that there is something metaphysical behind reality. And then there's an abstract category of crop circles, which tells us, if you look at the dictionary definition, that it's about contact with other realms. So I think that we're having a therapy lesson, that we're being reminded of all of our efforts throughout history, right up to now, of what we've done to try and grapple with the meaning of life and reality. And also at the same time, it's being done in crops, which has an implied message of, it's been the thing that changed us. Wiltshire is a location where we changed from hunter-gatherer to farming. Big transition. And from farming, we began to learn to grow a surplus, which has led to a capitalist trade system, which has its benefits, but also its downsides. And it's led us to be quite destructive to the planet and each other. So by laying those cards on the table, the crop circles are showing us where we've come from, where we are now, and giving us choices, like any good therapist, about making decisions of how we want to change for the future.
So whatever's creating this phenomena, I suppose you could say that there's an underlying care for us, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if you interact with the crop circles, as I have for 25 years, you get a deep sense of that. It's like being in the presence of someone who I've been to India. I spent 3 months in an Indian ashram. And one thing about the Indian people, and the specialness of India, is the people and the love. You don't feel it as much as you do in the when you go there. In the West, everybody's busy and everybody's trying to get ahead of each other. Indian people see life as a privilege rather than a right. And you get a feeling, and you get that feeling for the crop circles and the agency that's behind giving us those messages.
So when you've taken your first walk into the first crop circle, to the many others that you've walked through that Darcy explained, there was quite a number. There's an energy there, is there, that's different?
Yeah, it was more intense, and it's more intense for a lot of people in the initial stages when you first encounter them. There's, many people report fantastic coincidences and a sense of something other. And over time, over 25 years, that kind of diminishes because it becomes your kind of normal reality in a way, and so you get used to it. But there is an energy, which is subjective. But as a tour guide from 2008 till about 3 years ago, I worked as a tour guide taking people in groups to crop circles, and I was able to observe their reactions when they enter them. And you see people break down and cry. You see people get very high and elated. You see people get drunk. You see people have temporary alleviation from some of their ailments, like Parkinson's or so on. So there's something tangible, which you could say if it was just in a number of isolated cases, it would be anecdotal, but I've seen too much of it.
Yeah, and some could say, well, why don't they just land? Why don't they just make better contact than a crop circle? But is this a sort of gentler way for those that are ready for such an experience, do you think?
Well,
Absolutely.
my good friend Michael Glickman used to say, if you were an alien, would you land in a mental hospital if they were armed? And that's kind of how humanity is, really. And I like that answer. But I suppose on a more deeper sense, free will. Have we got free will, or are we controlled? If we have free will, then we absolutely have to have the right to destroy ourselves and the ability. Therefore, we can only be encouraged and helped by wise teachers. So I think that's part of the lesson, that we have to figure these things out for ourselves.
To add to that, I'll just say, if you look historically at our behavior, and Gary had mentioned that, the majority of the world is run by a capitalist society. Earthlings, humans, believe that we take ownership of this planet. We own it. We want to defend it. We want to control it. And therefore, anything that's been in our airspace, rather, over the years, we've most of the time shot at it or tried to prod it aggressively to understand it. And, if you go to the Battle of LA in 1942, we unloaded hundreds of shells in the air to try and take down a craft, a UFO that hovered over Los Angeles. A few people died from shrapnel. No one mentioned the UFO falling. But, that's one sign of aggression. Then you have Roswell. You have even recent videos that have come out, like the Tic Tac UFO. We're chasing these UFOs. We're not greeting them and saying, "Welcome to our planet. Land here. Let's start a discourse." And I think crop circles, from my point of view, are a very peaceful way of interacting with our planet and sending a message to us that says, not only the reflections that Gary was mentioning before, that are reflections of ourselves, to try and hold up a mirror to us saying, this is who you are. You can be better. But they're also saying, we're here. Hey guys, you're not alone, and we care, and you have an opportunity to change. You have an opportunity to go a certain way in your history, and we're watching, and we're interested. And you look at I mentioned this in the documentary, the Arecibo message that Carl Sagan sent out in 1974. He identified who we are as human beings, and we had a reply to that in the year 2000 in the Chilbolton crop area of the UK. And then in the year 2001, the exact same formation showed up with an extended message, which was apparently a reply to the Arecibo message. This showed their information regarding the type of radio telescope that they use to send messages into space. It records their bodily form, sort of what they look like compared to us, their DNA structure, the planet that they inhabit, and the moons surrounding the planet, which apparently there were 3. All this is incredible. It's a reply. And, Gary has even more evidence of replies to our interactions on this planet. So I think all of this proves that there's an intelligence, many different possible intelligence that are interacting with our planet, that are trying to get through to us. And this is a really peaceful messaging system in which there's continuity. It's been showing up throughout history, year over year. Every crop season that we have, more messaging is coming. It's not stopping. It keeps coming. And I think we will get some kind of confirmation eventually that these messages are real in the mainstream. But until then, it takes people like Gary, and other researchers out there to continue to prove this story and show this story to the world.
Absolutely. And maybe, our evolution is their evolution in ways that we don't understand and can't even comprehend. That, they're on some sort of journey to raise the consciousness, maybe. Do you know what I mean? That we come to each other from a more loving space, but to ourselves as well. We can be so cruel to ourselves as well. We can. And but maybe there is a time of change right now where it's time to grow up a bit from a spiritual perspective. And but I really want to ask you as well, with this documentary, how many people are featured in the documentary, speaker-wise?
It's mostly Jaime Maussan and Gary King, a little bit from Stephen Bassett, who's been hounding you. And, it's a condensed, short but sweet presentation, I believe. And I want to do more in this space. I want to show more research, but Stephen Bassett is an interesting person to balance an exopolitics and a sort of UFO perspective in this crop circle history. Gary is a boots on the ground researcher. He walks into the formations as we see in the documentary. His drone footage is beautiful. And, he's accumulated lots of that throughout the years. And then Jaime Maussan is a journalist that has taken this phenomenon seriously. There's not a lot of journalists out there in the world that take this phenomenon seriously and bring it to masses of people. This journalist has access to over 2 million Mexicans and Latin Americans every week with his show. I wish that kind of, audience was available to this type of research every day at the same scale in the United States and in, Canada, Japan, China,
Well,
wherever,
maybe
right?
that's just the consciousness level that that man's at. And I said this to you before, what kind of reality do you want to create? And that's the reality he's chosen he wants to create. That's what he wants to see more in the world of. You know, he wants to give this message out into the world and to show that, you know, that's the world that we could come from, this space, what this could teach us. And maybe some of those things about, you know, oneness and love to ourselves and others and being a bit kinder and everything else would come in. So he's just doing that, I think, isn't he? Or would you agree?
I would agree. I would agree. I mean, the amount of subjects that he covers in this overarching realm of ufology research is staggering. I mean, he covers absolutely everything and anything. Um, so it is a reality he's uh, pushing to exist. Um, and I've covered a fraction of it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you as well. How long did it take to edit this documentary?
Well, I flew over and interviewed Jaime in his studio in Mexico City back in 2000. I think it was the beginning of 2019, around January. And this documentary only came out in March of this year. So it took a while to write the story because, you know, even as a documentary filmmaker, you have to figure out which point you're going to go from next, you know, to balance out this story. And I had to do research and I had to look at the footage that he provided me and, um, you know, his version of the story. You know, if you watch the documentary, you know, he's been out to the UK many years on end throughout the 90s. When's the first time he came out and actually visited you, Gary?
Well, he visited, first time I met Jaime was in 2007, just after the 777 event. It was a coincidental meeting where I was hired to be a tour guide for him for half a day. But he first came to the crop circles in 2001 when the UFO, the alien and the alien disc and the message Chilbarton came down. So it seemed, and this sounds crazy, you know, it's always difficult to say these things, but it's almost like the intelligence knows about certain characters. And when certain characters like Jaime turn up at Wiltshire, they think, okay, you're going to get one that's going to be totally relevant to you. You know, earlier on in the 80s, when geometers, people that were, you know, Oxford Dons in geometry and sacred geometry turned up, then that's the stuff that we got, the richness of. So
That's such
yeah,
a crazy
that's
thing,
very
isn't it?
fascinating.
That it knows, it's self-aware,
It
it's
knows.
conscious. So, I mean, you filmed. Oh, well, not you. Well, you can tell me if you have actually, but you've got footage. Darcy's put footage in the documentary where you see some of these crop formations being, you know, made, and is it almost like in a very quick succession?
Well, there's two examples throughout the years where witnesses have been present for crop circles. The first one is 1996, which features in the documentary. It's an Australian young man, John Whaley, who came over to visit the crop circles, as many people do. Excuse me. He did a night watch and woke up in the morning, was awoken by some noises and saw these lights flying over the field, these orbs. Fired up his video camera and filmed them. And when the video was replayed subsequently, he could see, or everybody saw, that the crop circle just went down. The crop just laid down as a result of these orbs flying over. Obviously, it was debunked, and he was called a fraud. But we did some proper analysis on the footage and sent it to several studios and had it analysed. And there's absolutely no way this footage. Yeah, that's all in there. And then there's myself in 2007. I went on top of a hill in 2007 with my girlfriend, and we had a cameraman who was filming the field all night. It was a different experience this time because it was a flash of light rather than orbs. And there was a over 1,000 foot crop circle in front of us, consisting of over 150 circles that have appeared in just a short period of time.
Yeah, so completely out of our perception of reality of what's going on here, right? So are these crafts? Is this conscious phenomena coming from within the ground or from above?
It's possible that it's both. I mean, scientific analysis of the crops and the soil has revealed that terrestrial energies are being used to make the crops lay down. Electricity, microwaves, and magnetism. In the case of 777, plasma was detected, which exists at about 80,000 feet in the atmosphere. It's a highly charged form of matter, which, you know, is chaotic. So it seems that whatever the intelligence is manipulating energies that are already here in some fashion to make these designs. I think there's probably more to it than that, but that's what we're able to put our hands on and establish, definitely through scientific analysis. Where we would assume that they're coming from above, but we just don't know for sure. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with mystery.
With some of these crop circles, obviously they're always circular. I mean, I think Darcy touched on this at the very beginning. But there, and as you've said in this interview, there is a mathematical formula to these. It's very, very precise.
Yeah. They coined the phrase crop circles from the early, sort of late 70s, early 80s when they were first discovered, because that's what they were. They were simple circles. And a circle philosophically, in sacred geometry terms, is very profound. It contains the finite and the infinite. The relationship between the diameter and the circumference is a relationship between something which is finite, like us, and something which is infinite, which is potentially our soul or the creator or whatever. So there's a deep philosophical symbolism to the circle. Stories go back in time where the Pope wanted to hire somebody to paint, and Giotto painted a perfect circle freehand, and he got hired because the Pope knew the profundity of the circle. But since then, they evolved. Once humans started to pay attention, they evolved through 2, 3, 4 circles, 5 circles, and then pictograms, which contains hidden geometry, as I mentioned earlier. And this is the bit that I love, that's often difficult to get across to people. But if you look at Islamic patterns, for example, in mosques, you know, they always express the infinite through the geometry in the mosques and so on. And in order to draw those, if you go to the Alhambra and you look at the patterns on the designs and so on, I took some workshops, and if you draw those, you have to draw a great deal of underlying geometry that then, with just a straight edge, there's no rulers used, there's no measurement systems used, just a straight edge, a pencil and a compass. Once you've drawn this underlying geometry, it reveals certain elements which you can color in to make the pattern that you see, and then you rub out the underlying geometry. Well, crop circles are like that. There's an underlying geometry to them which you don't see. And it's the same as nature, as I mentioned earlier. So it contains things like pi, the Fibonacci sequence, the golden section, and they perform mathematical. They've given us mathematical solutions to ancient geometric puzzles, such as squaring the circle, which is symbolically the uniting of heaven and earth. We're able to look back throughout history and say, okay, this pursuit of trying to square a circle, which is to make the perimeter and circumference of a circle, square and a circle the same, or the areas, how well have we done with that as humans? And you can go right back to Pythagoras and all that. And you can say, oh, they got it sort of 96% accurate, but with very, very, very complicated underlying constructions in order to try and achieve it. Excuse me. In 1998, my dear colleague Michael Glickman discovered that the five crops, the circles which contain 5 dots, like on a dice, with a central circle, were actually giving us a solution to squaring the circle, to solving this problem. So another researcher by the name of Alan Brown looked back over the 25-year history of those types of formations, which are all different, the same but different. And we've been given over 100 new solutions to back engineering squared circles using a pentagram, which is the symbol for life and man. And they're accurate to the thickness of the pencil line, using 5 simple dots, which I was able to teach my children when they were sort of 8 and 9. So if you've got something which is very, very complicated that man has tried to achieve for over 2,000 years and never really got that close to it, and then somebody comes along, some energy comes along, some intelligence comes along, creates these crop circles using 5 simple circles and gives us these solutions to doing it really, really simply. To me, that's a definition of high intelligence. When you, like Einstein said, if you can't explain it to someone like your 6-year-old, then you don't really understand it. So that's what the crop circles have done. They've said, look, here's simple 5 circles, and you can do it.
Yes, absolutely.
So I
And
love that.
how do you think it's changed yourself over these years? You know, spending so much time in the energy of these crop circles, and doing the path, going down the path you have. Do you think it's changed you in a sense?
Oh, complete transformation, really. But then there's a part of me that's still the same. I'm still the guy that grew up in North London, that struggled and bounced around and did what I did. I'm still that person. I still get worked up. I still get frustrated and angry, particularly with politics of today. But there's this side of me. There's this side of me which is now completely convinced that there is something other, and that our life does have some kind of meaning, and that love and goodness and is the way that we should be to each other. So it's completely transformed the way my outlook on life. I would have never, ever, ever learned the things that I've learned about life and about creation were it not for the crop circles.
Yeah, absolutely. And both you and Darcy have shared that by putting this, putting the documentary out there as well, or your contribution to it as well. So obviously we're both we're all in America right now, two English guys and Darcy. But obviously I've probably I don't think Darcy you've never been in a crop circle, have you, in the UK?
I haven't. That is a adventure I would love to pursue. Yeah.
Yes, that's on the to-do list. Right, right. Um, why? I
Mhm.
don't know if you can answer this, Darcy, but why are the crop circles mainly in Wiltshire, or do you think that should be a Gary question?
Well, I can start, and he can most likely finish. You know, we I mentioned before that there's a continuity to this messaging, and I liken that to, if you're communicating with a good friend or a business partner, what have you, you want to have one sort of stream, one dedicated stream of communication that keeps that continuity, keeps that history intact. And you might start up your conversation on Skype, you might start up your conversation on WhatsApp, um, it might be Facebook Messenger, it might be Signal, it might be just basic SMS text messaging. But if you really want to make that conversation important, you're going to continue it with that one messaging technology. And we've all had those times where somebody starts the conversation on WhatsApp, moves to Facebook Messenger, then they're emailing you, and you're like, dude, stick to one stream. Okay. You're like, it's just one, and we're good. Well, that's what happens with this phenomenon. We've got crop circles showing up since, which we can go back, the earliest recorded in the 1700s, was it?
1678 or
16,
something.
1678, right? So, yeah, the Devil Shall Mow is the first crop circle that we can record in the Wiltshire area. And that's not to say that crop circles haven't shown up all around the world. They have. But the vast majority have shown up in this farm area, this country area of the UK, and I think it's trying to communicate to us that every year we're going to have more messaging here. Come back, tune in, and the conversation will continue. And Gary will probably tell you a bit more about that history and its importance in the UK and why he thinks this is an important place.
Yeah, thanks for that, Darcy. Yeah, Gary,
Yeah, we'll,
go ahead. I just want to ask you just one thing to maybe add on as well. Is there something about the ley lines?
sure.
So don't forget what we're talking about here. I'm sorry to butt in. Is there something about the ley lines, the energy in that, of Wiltshire, in a sense?
Well, the ley lines um, are prolific throughout England. They go from sort of east to west, and they move around. John Michell, Hamish Miller, a bunch of really good researchers did a lot of work on ley lines. And yes, because of Avebury and because of energy spots there, that it seems that there's a connection, no doubt. But again, it's something that dowsers rely on. And yes, I've come to respect the people that have done that work, but it's not grounded enough for me in kind of, stuff that we can really put our hands on and wrestle with. So I went down the more practical way of saying, okay, what's the history of this place? So we've got Stonehenge and Avebury and a bunch of other monuments in that area. So we know that our ancestors favoured that area. The Druids, possibly from Wales, who built the first Stonehenge, moved into Wiltshire and located that area there. We know that it's where farming began, where humanity transformed from hunter-gatherers to farmers, which changed us. And then moving forward in time, the crops, the surplus of crops gave us the ability to have wealth. Now, if you look at Wiltshire in the 1600s, you've got Oliver Cromwell, you've got the Enclosure Act. So what that means is that up until these times, the land was everybody's birthright. If you were a human being, you had the right to live on the land. But in order to create the capitalist sort of trade system that we live in, we were told by the elites that you had to pay rent, and you had to work for the elites to pay the rent so that you could, get on in the world and so on. And that's led us to where we are now. You've got monuments that were put up there in honor of people like Sir William Petty, who said in the 1600s, okay, the British Empire no longer needs a surplus of grain to get bigger and richer and more powerful. It needs a surplus of souls. We need disposable people. And the population then was around 900 million, and we're getting close to probably 8 billion now in 400 years. And we've got a lot of disposable souls now, right? We've got people that are becoming even more disposable. So the way human life has been treated, what we've been given as the purpose of our life through culture, through economics, the ability to sell each other things and try and compete with people that you can't compete with because of inherited wealth that comes from Wiltshire, is again, to me, the context for what the crop circles are trying to tell us. They're trying to tell us, look, the story you live by, what you all think is your meaning to life, to get into debt, borrow money, get a mortgage, build a house on, pay stupid amounts of money for it and give up your life for, is probably not what the meaning of life is all about.
So true, so true. And, I do believe that we create our reality, and I feel that we got free will. Um, but I completely agree with everything you're saying there. And that thinking, that breakaway thinking comes from doing this work and looking at that deeper question. What is that thing that's behind my eyes? What is this I am? This thing that's always been and will never be destroyed, probably. That's aware of its of the awareness right now. It's yeah. And I guess as well, it's almost, when you look at the spiritual side as well, it's almost like saying, what teaching information can you bring from that side that would make this present moment more fulfilling, more happier, more loving, just a bit like a life coach kind of energy. Do you know what I mean? What hidden
cooperation?
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, yes, cooperation. Well, look at the conflicts in Palestine. Back just a few weeks ago, over borders that man's made. Yeah. We need more of this, don't we?
Built in God.
Oh, religion. Well,
who's the creator? Who's our imaginary friend that we believe in and will kill for?
Well, well, religion. Tell me what to do, say, think, and feel, and and take no responsibility for thyself. But and you know, anyone that's in religion watching this, if it works for you, fantastic, keep doing it. But I see more and more people now wanting more. Yeah, wanting
Yeah, I
something
think we
different.
force our beliefs, don't we? We force our beliefs on people. And that's one of the things I've learned from the crop circles. I'm here now talking to you about what I found out from my investigations. I'm pretty much 99% detached from whether or not anybody believes me. It's upsetting when people don't, because I'm just laying out the facts as I can, and I'll speculate as to my beliefs. But I don't want to force those on anybody. And the crop circles don't do that either. They're out in the middle of nowhere. It's entirely our choice whether we engage them, and they don't force anything on us. They ask us to make our decisions. And I think there's a message in that too, how we treat each other.
And I think, you know, a documentary like this, you know, its legacy will be the message. Yeah, that generations can come and view and maybe update as well one day with some other information as we progress. Um,
Absolutely.
just very
Yeah.
quickly, yeah, Darcy, I just want to touch on this as well. Thank you so much for that, Gary. Obviously,
You're welcome.
we talked about it a little bit, the idea of faking the crop circles and how easily people will, you know, say, well, this is just, you know, it's been, you know, but it doesn't it take like a group of 20 or more people or maybe more to create even the most basic geometry?
Um, you know, if you look at the formations that Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley made, they're by no means complex and symmetrical, um, to the extent that some of these massive, like incredibly geometric, you know, 3D formations have shown up over the years. And we showcase a few of those designs in the documentary that are just like absolutely amazing. For a group of people to make that, it's possible. But to do it in the same conditions that these ones have shown up over the years is, to my knowledge, impossible. The cover of night, no lights, um, you know, constructing the formation on an uneven surface. You know, a lot of these ones that we see human crop circle builders make are on completely flat terrain. And we look at a canola formation that shows up. It's a big 3D cube surrounded by concentric circle sort of design. And it's floating in the middle of this on a hill in the middle of a canola field. And the flowers aren't damaged. The stalks of the plants are completely intact. And the stalk of canola is like celery stalk. You know, it's thick. It's like like a quarter round, you know? And so to make that the way Doug and Dave would have done, which is a wood plank and a rope and stomping as you go along to compress the plants down, you're basically breaking them. And what we see in many of the formations is signs that whoever made them didn't want to kill the crop. They didn't want to completely damage them so that they're not growing anymore. And when you look at the formation that Gary walks into in this documentary, he walks into it the middle of the day and the sun is completely out. It's a beautiful sunny day. And the plants are subject to their own science, which is photosynthesis. They're trying to rise up to the sun, which is phototropism, I believe. Yeah. And, you know, you see this even in your house plant. If you turn it away from the window and it's a really sunny day, by the end of the day, you'll see the stalk of the plant is bending, the flowers and the petals are all starting to force its way towards the source, the sun, so it can create its energy. And you see this happening in the formations that are incredibly complex that have shown up in the cover of night in a few hours, you know, with no humans to account for doing it. And, you know, they're massive. So if you did the calculations, it would mean that this formation would have had to have been made, at minutes at a time, really quickly. And there's no damage. That there's, unless people have walked through the formation brand new. And when you see people walking through, they're stamping down and killing portions of the crop. So, Jaime Maussan even offers $100,000 for people to do this with the exact same circumstances. And no one's been able to come forward to do it. Doug and Dave never could. And they went on tour trying to prove that they made all of them, which again has been linked to some intelligence agencies in the UK that wanted to squash the story, that wanted the mainstream to pick this story up and say, oh, it was Doug and Dave. Mystery solved. Let's move on.
Yeah, nothing to look at here. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And is it seasonal? Because I mean, I hope that's not a silly question, but obviously, it's not all year round. The crop circles, obviously, with the seasons and stuff, is it?
It's funny. It's one of the most common questions I've been asked over the years. People have actually said to me, well, it's obviously man-made because people don't come out in the winter to make them, but there are no crops in the winter. They only grow when the sun's up. Yeah. I mean, in some countries like America, you get crops all year round.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And what is the when maybe snow settles on previous crop circle formations, where they happen? Is there a difference in like does snow settle there? Is there a difference in what does regrow there as well?
I work here with Jaime Maussan in Mexico City producing stuff for television. And I recently, about a month or 6 weeks ago, produced one of the pieces for the show, which is about what we call ghost or phantom circles. There's two examples, wonderful examples of photographic evidence where highly complex geometric crop circles have come down in the summertime in the crops, and then the crop gets harvested and dies off in the winter, and the snow falls and it melts where the design is, so you can still see the design. You've got a landscape of white except for this geometric that's where the snow just wouldn't settle.
Incredible. Well, we are getting to the end of the interview here, time-wise, because I know that I promised you guys that I would wrap up at a certain time. There's so much more to discuss, right? And I'm sure there was so much more that you wanted to put in the documentary. So, Gary, just is there any website for you directly, or?
I run a Facebook page called Against the Grain. People can come on and join and contribute in any way. I try to publish 2 or 3 times a week different things. I have a YouTube channel of the same name, so videos I've made over the years, I've got information on that. That's basically my main source of contact for people who want to get more information.
Okay, well, the Facebook page has been coming up on the screen as we've been discussing different subjects, and that's all available in the description down below. So, Gary, just thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a complete pleasure to have you on, and thank you for contributing towards this important documentary as well.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And Darcy, I just want to thank you as well. Just remind us of your website one more time, Darcy.
Sure. It's www.occultjourneys.com. People can watch the trailers there for my docs. They can click on the poster. The poster will take them through to a site that they can stream the film. And, there's a description there. All my features that are published so far are up there. So I hope people enjoy them. And if they want to reach out and communicate with me, I'm just Darcy Weir on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Occult Journeys. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, again, all those descriptions are going to be in the links below, and your site's been coming up as well. And I'll say to you as well, thank you for putting the hard effort in to putting this together, because I can imagine that the editing of this was just as hard as going out on the road to make it as well, because it's obviously like redirecting it again sometimes, isn't it, once you get it all together. So, Darcy, just thank you for what you're doing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.